Want to see something really exciting?
"30 years ago, a rivalry nobody remembers or cares about hit its peak. Pontiac versus Toyota. Who could make the superior poor man's Ferrari? In 1988, if you wanted a mid-engine sports car but couldn't afford an Italian exotic, you had two options: Pontiac's Fiero or Toyota's MR2. Both cars received a substantial upgrade in '88. The MR2 now offered a supercharged version in the US, while the Fiero released a formula trim with vastly improved suspension. To put the latter into context, before '88 you would have been stuck with suspension parts from the Chevy Chevette and the Citation. There are plenty of articles from 1988 comparing the two, and a great video from Motor Week, but as it's now 2018 and I have both cars, I want to take a look at how they hold up today and what it's like to drive them now, in my appallingly monotone voice. This is my Fiero formula. I bought it in 2011 with 79,000 miles on it. It came with a 5-speed Getrag transmission and a 2.8-liter V6. I've since swapped in an LQ1 engine, a 3.4-liter dual overhead cam V6 out of a 96 Lumina. It makes 215 horsepower and 220 pound-feet of torque. I've also updated the 15-inch wheels to 17 inches with high-performance tires. The failure-prone pop-up lights have been replaced with these new inset lights that look like ones in a 300Z. And I've also added a stereo with Alpine speakers and a subwoofer that fits behind the passenger seat. This is my supercharged MR2. I traded my '86 Mustang SVO for this car in 2016. It has the 4A GZE engine, a supercharged 1.6-liter inline-4. Stock, it pushed 8 pounds of boost and made 145 horsepower and 140 pound-feet of torque. This one has been modified to make 11 pounds of boost and has this weird air intake thing on the side. If I had to guess, I'd say it's maybe making close to 180 horsepower. It also has some suspension upgrades to make it match the base MR2, which apparently handles better than the supercharged variation. Both cars were owned by old guys who loved them and took good care of them, so they don't have as many problems as you'd expect from 30-year-old vehicles. So what's it like to drive the Fiero? The first thing you'll notice is how low to the ground you are. You feel like your butt is about 4 inches from the road. Your feet stick out nearly straight in front of you. Getting out of the seat gracefully requires great discipline and flexibility, usually only found in yoga masters. As you get too old to fold your spine in half, this is probably the car you'll have to sell first. The next thing you'll notice is the shifter. It's difficult to move between gates, so the odd number gears are going to be your pain points. It almost takes 2 hands to get it into first. Shifting to third takes a weird dogleg motion and a lot of force. It only recently started having this problem. It was quite satisfactory before and could be a simple fix to get it back there, but we're judging the cars by how they are now. So, sorry Fiero, but you get points docked for the shifting. The torque of the V6 and the precision of the steering make the Fiero fun to drive down the road. It would be great to take to the track, if there were a track anywhere near me. When you step on the accelerator, you can feel it pull almost immediately, and it builds from there all the way to redline, though it never hits holy crap acceleration. The seats could provide better support, but at least there's lots of leg room and a dead pedal, so it's plenty comfortable. The reliability is pretty good. I've taken the car on 8-hour road trips with no problems. It's also surprisingly quiet in the cabin for what it is. The MR2 feels very different. After the Fiero, getting in and out of the MR2 feels like an SUV. Even though the MR2 is slightly shorter than the Fiero, the seating position is higher, so you could be forgiven for forgetting that you're sitting in a sports car. As you've probably heard, the shifting is a bit notchy, whatever that means, but still way better than the Fiero's right now. The doors also open and close much more easily. Despite what I've read, the power doesn't come on immediately. It doesn't really start pulling hard until about 4,000 RPM. When it does kick in, it's a real joy, thanks in part to the car's 2,500 pound curb weight. The handling is also pretty good, though it feels like it doesn't hold the road as well as the Fiero. This could be just down to the older tires. The biggest flaw in this car is the T-tops. Sure, it's cool to be able to take the tops down now and then, but it's not worth the trade-off. It's very loud when going down the highway. It sounds like you have the window cracked. And like any T-top car of this era, it isn't exactly watertight. When it rains, the water pulls up in a crevice somewhere, and then when you're driving it later and you hit the brakes, it pees all over your arm.
Why do I have to be the guinea pig?
So let's do some side-by-side comparisons, starting with sound. It's no contest. Although the MR2's exhaust is acceptable for an inline-4, it can't match the sonic delight of a 60-degree V6. Point goes to the Fiero. Next, let's look at performance. Both cars are pretty quick. The MR2 is really fun at high RPM, but the Fiero is fun at all RPM. Something a lot of would-be car enthusiasts don't understand is the numbers can be misleading. The MR2 is better because it has a faster lap time at the hamburger ring track and a better 0 to 60 time. When you've never driven a fast car before, and especially if you haven't driven at all, you think you'll always be making the peak horsepower number. But in the real world, you don't want to stay close to the red line all the time. It's loud, it burns fuel, and it's likely to get the cops keeping an eye out for you. Don't underestimate the value of torque. You don't have to be racing to have a good time in a car that pulls you into your seat at 1500 RPM on the way to get groceries. So long story short, I prefer the acceleration of the Fiero. I also feel a little more secure in the corners than Pontiac's car, so overall I have to give the point to the Fiero again. What about styling? At first glance they look very similar. Your preference will likely come down to whether you prefer swoopy curves or boxy lines. I think they're both beautiful cars, but I like the Fiero a bit more. The taillight treatment pushes it over the edge for me. The Fiero's taillights have a more exotic look, while the MR2s look like they'd be at home in any sedan at the time. But what's the biggest styling edge the Fiero has over the MR2?
Quad 2.
However, I seem to be in the minority on my preference. The MR2 has gotten a lot more attention. More than once, someone driving by saw it parked where I work and pulled over and came into my office to talk to me about it. And one couple in Starbucks parking lot took a photo of it. Also, my wife prefers the MR2, so even though I disagree, the styling point has to go to the MR2. Interior. The MR2 has pretty nice leather seats, while the Fiero has rather plain cloth. Both are showing some tears in their age. The carpets are about equal. The dash is held up better in the Fiero. Unfortunately for the Fiero, it loses this one because of its glove box, or rather its glove pocket. The MR2 has a real box. Look at that box. I could store my insurance in that baby all day. Point to the MR2. Now which one has more annoyances? Well, the MR2 is loud and leaky, and many models are very prone to rust. I got very lucky to get one with virtually no rust except a piece above the windshield, which I've replaced. The Fiero has plastic body panels, so rust will never be a problem. The Fiero has inferior AC controls. Note the lack of a dedicated AC button, a switch the MR2 proudly displays to the world. Still, I have to give this one to the Fiero. That wind noise is pretty bad. Modability. I've already mentioned the mods I have. The MR2 has some turbo kits available if you want more power, but it doesn't hold a candle to the Fiero. It has a large engine bay, and I've seen everything shoved in there from an LS3 to a steam engine. It's also a kit car enthusiast's dream, with tons of body kits out there to fool your friends into thinking you have a Ford GT, a Ferrari 308, a Lamborghini Miura, or a Yugo. The winner? I don't know, I lost count. It doesn't matter. These cars are both beautiful timepieces that should be treasured and cared for. If you have one of these, or any other classic car, don't just let it sit on your lawn and get rusty. Go show it some love, or give it to someone who will. Cars are only getting more and more unlike these, largely due to strict regulations. Seatbelt alarms, power steering, giant A-pillars that ugly up the car and make it harder to see, traction control, torque vectoring, brakes controlled by a computer, the slow death with a manual transmission, and probably in our lifetime, cars that don't even let you do the driving. The market for this type of car today is pretty dried up. If you were looking for a mid-engine sports car in 1988 and weren't blessed with much wealth, you could go to the dealership and walk away with a base model Fiero for $8,000, plus whatever markup the dealer added on. Adjusting for inflation, that's $17,000 today. The closest you could get to that now would, I guess, be the Honda S660. It's about the same cost and it's mid-engine, but that's only sold in Japan, and it has a 660cc motor. And the next step up is a Lotus Elise, the cheapest of which can be found for about $50,000. That's an irresponsible amount of money to spend on a car for most people. That's enough grumpy old manning for one video. Now go hop in your sports car, pop in a cassette tape of Whitesnake, and take a drive to your local Blockbuster. This video was sponsored by Blockbuster. Blockbuster. Wow, what a difference.